The gray, melting snow hid something no one was ever meant to find. At first, it looked like a broken tree branch pushing through the icy surface. But as veteran forest ranger Elias Turner stepped closer, every instinct told him to stop. It wasn't wood. It was a human hand. Frozen fingers reached toward the sky as though someone had tried to hold on to life with one final desperate breath. Elias dropped to his knees and slowly cleared away the heavy snow. What he uncovered beneath it would force an entire town to question everything they thought they knew about the man who had disappeared months before. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from today. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and stay with us until the very end, because this story is one you'll never forget. Early March settled quietly over Idaho's Bitterroot Mountains as winter slowly loosened its grip on the forest. The snow no longer covered the world with perfect white silence. It sagged beneath the afternoon sun, dripping steadily from pine branches and exposing patches of dark earth that had not seen daylight for months. Small streams whispered beneath thin sheets of ice, carrying away the last traces of a long, unforgiving winter. For Elias Turner, those sounds always meant the same thing. The mountain was waking up. At 60 years old, Elias had spent more than 3 decades patrolling these forests. Every trail, every ridge, every forgotten creek seemed to recognize his footsteps. Since losing his wife, Rebecca, 4 years earlier, the woods had become more than his workplace. They had become the only place where loneliness didn't feel quite so loud. People often assumed solitude was peaceful. They had never buried the person who made a house feel like home. Elias adjusted the binoculars hanging from his neck and continued along a narrow game trail where deer often crossed during early spring. The melting snow made each step heavy. Boots sank several inches before finding frozen ground beneath. Then something unusual caught his eye. About 30 yards ahead, something dark protruded from a mound of snow beside a fallen pine. At first, he dismissed it as another broken branch. He took 2 more steps, stopped, looked again. Every instinct sharpened at once. That wasn't wood. Elias hurried forward, dropping to one knee as cold water soaked through his pants. With gloved hands, he carefully brushed away the wet snow. 5 pale fingers emerged. Human. His heartbeat slowed instead of racing, the way it always did during emergencies. 30 years in the wilderness had taught him that panic never saved lives. Unfortunately, this life was already gone. He uncovered more of the body, revealing a thick winter jacket, frozen solid beneath layers of ice. A weathered backpack lay only a few feet away. The face appeared last. Even before the sheriff arrived, Elias recognized him. Caleb Dawson, the missing man whose disappearance had become the favorite topic of every diner and grocery store in the county. They said he skipped town. They said he owed everybody money. They said he'd never come back. Apparently everyone had been wrong. Elias examined the scene carefully without disturbing more than necessary. The enormous pine lying across the slope immediately told part of the story. Its roots had torn free during one of the winter windstorms. The trunk had crushed Caleb's left leg. No one could have escaped that alone. Yet something didn't fit. The body rested nearly 40 yards from the fallen tree. Elias followed the faint depression preserved beneath layers of snow. Marks. Not footprints, drag marks. Caleb hadn't died where the tree fell. He had dragged himself, foot after foot, hand after hand. 40 impossible yards through snow, ice, and unbearable pain. Not toward the trail, toward something else. A quiet ache settled inside Elias's chest. Whoever Caleb had been in his final hours, he hadn't given up easily. As Elias gently lifted one frozen hand to document its position, something metallic caught the light. A brass key, old, heavy. Its surface carried tiny engraved markings almost worn away by time. Beneath Caleb's fingers rested a folded piece of parchment wrapped in yellowed, waxed cloth. Despite months beneath the snow, the wrapping had protected it from moisture. A map. Elias unfolded only enough to glimpse faded ink and a hand-drawn trail leading deep into the national forest. He quickly wrapped it again. The sheriff would eventually catalog everything. That was procedure. But procedure couldn't explain the feeling growing in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't simply evidence. It felt like a message. He slipped the brass key quietly into the inside pocket of his jacket before reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Turner." His voice remained steady. "I've located the missing subject." There was a long silence before dispatch answered. "Copy that." By sunset, deputies, paramedics, and the county coroner surrounded the clearing. News spread quickly. Unfortunately, gossip traveled even faster. "They finally found the fool. He died chasing money. Guess greed caught up with him." Elias stood silently while listening to conversations that made his jaw tighten. None of them had seen what he had seen. None of them had watched a dying man crawl through 40 yards of snow instead of surrendering. Greedy men didn't fight that hard. On the drive back to the ranger's station, memories surfaced one after another. Caleb repairing an elderly widow's fence without charging her, leaving bags of firewood anonymously on a veteran's porch, helping stranded hikers after a summer flood while refusing any reward. Those stories had never made headlines. Debt had. Rumors had. Failure had. Elias parked outside his cabin well after dark. He locked the door behind him and removed the brass key from his pocket. Then he carefully unfolded the wax-covered map across his kitchen table. The faded trail crossed ridges he knew by heart, until it didn't. Near the edge of the protected wilderness, a small circle marked one final destination. No official trail, no ranger station, no fire lookout, just a single handwritten note. Cabin. Elias stared at the location for several long minutes. In 30 years of protecting these mountains, he had never once set foot there. And somehow, he knew that was exactly where Caleb Dawson had been trying to go before winter claimed his life. The following morning arrived, wrapped in cold mist, and the Bitterroot Mountains seemed determined to keep their secrets hidden beneath drifting clouds. Elias barely slept. The map had remained spread across his kitchen table all night, its faded ink refusing to leave his thoughts. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Caleb Dawson dragging himself through the snow, one painful yard at a time. The image lingered like a question with no answer. If Caleb had fought that hard, whatever waited at the end of the map had mattered more than his own suffering. By sunrise, Elias had made his decision. He would follow the map before handing everything over to the authorities. He packed lightly: a thermos of coffee, a first aid kit, extra ammunition for emergencies, climbing rope, and enough food for a full day. The brass key rested securely inside his jacket pocket. As he drove his aging Forest Service truck deeper into the reserve, familiar roads gradually disappeared behind him. Eventually, he reached a rusted gate marking the end of official maintenance. Everything beyond belonged only to wildlife and forgotten history. The trail on the map was unlike anything shown on modern ranger charts. It wound between granite cliffs, crossed a narrow creek swollen by melting snow, then disappeared into a thick stand of ancient cedar trees. Elias frowned. How had he never known this route existed? 30 years in these mountains should have made that impossible, yet the faint path looked untouched for decades. Nature had slowly reclaimed it. Broken branches scratched against his jacket as he climbed higher. Every few minutes he stopped, comparing the landscape to the map. The hand-drawn landmarks matched perfectly. A split boulder, a dead cedar twisted by lightning, a shallow ravine where snow still reached his knees. Whoever drew this map knew the mountains intimately. Nearly 3 hours later, the forest suddenly opened into a small clearing. Elias stopped walking. A cabin stood quietly beneath towering pines. Its roof sagged beneath years of neglect. Moss covered half the chimney. One shutter hung crooked from a rusted hinge, while vines crawled over the weathered logs. Yet something felt strangely untouched. No broken windows, no signs of vandalism, almost as if the wilderness itself had been protecting the place. He approached cautiously. The brass key felt unexpectedly heavy in his hand. The old lock resisted at first, then, click! The sound echoed through the silent clearing. Elias slowly pushed the door open. A wave of cold, stale air drifted out. Dust floated through thin shafts of sunlight pouring between cracked shutters. Nothing had been disturbed. A cast-iron stove still stood in one corner. Shelves remained lined with carefully stacked jars, long emptied by time. A handmade quilt rested across a narrow bed. An oil lamp sat on a wooden table beside a cracked coffee mug. Someone hadn't abandoned this cabin in a hurry. Someone had expected to return. Elias removed his hat instinctively. The place felt less like an abandoned building and more like a memory frozen in time. His eyes wandered across faded photographs hanging above the fireplace. Faces, families, children smiling in black and white portraits. Most had no names written beneath them. One picture, however, caught his attention. A young boy stood beside an older man holding an identical brass key. The resemblance struck him immediately. The boy looked remarkably like Caleb. A chill crept along Elias's spine. "What were you trying to protect?" he whispered. The answer did not come. Instead, his instincts led him toward the center of the room. Years of working in old cabins had taught him to notice things others overlooked. The wooden floor sounded solid, except for one section. He tapped it again, hollow. Kneeling carefully, Elias brushed away layers of dust until he uncovered the outline of a hidden trapdoor. His pulse quickened. Using the tip of his hunting knife, he lifted the concealed ring handle. The hatch groaned open. Below rested a narrow storage space. Inside sat a large cedar chest reinforced with iron bands. Time had darkened the wood, but the craftsmanship remained beautiful. On top of the chest lay a single envelope. Its paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in neat blue ink, were 6 simple words: "For Martha Dawson only." Elias stared at the name. He reached toward the envelope, then stopped. No, it wasn't his letter to read. Instead, he carefully lifted the heavy chest onto the floor. Inside were neatly stacked gold coins sealed inside cloth bags, several bundles of old property deeds, faded family documents, and a leather journal wrapped in protective oilcloth. The fortune was substantial, enough to erase every debt Caleb had ever carried, enough to change Martha Dawson's life forever. Elias suddenly understood something that no one else in town had considered. Caleb hadn't disappeared because he wanted to escape. He had been trying to reach this cabin, trying to save something, or someone. As evening shadows stretched across the clearing, Elias sat alone on the cabin porch with the unopened letter resting beside him. For the first time in years, he found himself speaking aloud to Rebecca. "I think I've been looking at the wrong man." The wind carried no answer, only the soft whisper of melting snow falling from pine branches. Elias folded the map once more and slipped the brass key back into his pocket. Tomorrow, he would begin uncovering the truth. He had no idea that someone else already knew the cabin existed, and that before another sunset, they would come looking for what Caleb Dawson had died trying to protect. The rain arrived before dawn, washing away the last traces of snow from the lower slopes of the Bitterroot Mountains. Elias Turner left the cabin before sunrise, carefully securing the cedar chest beneath a canvas tarp in the back of his truck. He locked the old cabin exactly as he had found it, sliding the brass key back into his pocket. As he looked one last time toward the weathered porch, an uneasy feeling settled over him. The cabin had remained hidden for decades. Now that he knew where it was, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone else might know as well. The drive back felt longer than usual. Every passing vehicle caught his attention. Every set of headlights lingering in his rearview mirror made him glance twice. Maybe he was imagining things. Or maybe 30 years in the wilderness had taught him when danger preferred to stay unseen. The county sheriff's office was already busy when Elias stopped to deliver his official report. Sheriff Daniel Brooks met him outside. "We finished the preliminary examination," Brooks said. "Medical examiner confirmed what you suspected." Elias nodded. "The tree?" "The pine shattered his leg. Hypothermia finished the rest." The sheriff sighed. "Sad way to go." Elias remained silent. Brooks folded his arms. "You know, folks around here still think Caleb brought it on himself." "I've heard. They say he borrowed money from half the county." "They say a lot of things." Brooks looked at him carefully. "You disagree." Elias stared toward the mountains beyond town. "I've seen men give up when life got hard." He paused. "Caleb wasn't one of them." By lunchtime, the story of Caleb's body had spread through every cafe, gas station, and grocery store. Elias stepped into Miller's diner for coffee. The conversations stopped only for a second before continuing. He finally got what was coming. Probably hiding stolen money. Wouldn't surprise me if he was running from collectors. One elderly man laughed. "Guess greed buried him." Elias slowly set his coffee cup back onto the counter. "You ever spend an hour talking with him?" he asked quietly. The table fell silent. Nobody answered. "You ever see him fix Mrs. Parker's roof after the windstorm?" Blank faces. "You know who delivered groceries to old Mr. Hanson after his stroke?" Silence. "You know who repaired the church furnace 3 winters ago without asking for a dime?" Several people looked away. Elias stood. "No." His voice remained calm. "You only remember the debts." Without another word, he walked out. The bell above the diner door rang softly behind him. That afternoon he drove toward Martha Dawson's small farmhouse, but stopped halfway. Something didn't feel right. She deserved to receive the letter personally. But first, Elias needed to understand who might try to take what belonged to her. The answer arrived sooner than expected. Victor Hale was waiting outside the farm supply store. Victor owned nearly 2,000 acres of ranch land and had a reputation for smiling with his mouth while calculating with his eyes. "Ranger Turner." Victor removed his hat politely. "Heard you found Caleb." "I did." "Tough break." Neither man moved. Victor glanced toward Elias's truck. "They find anything interesting with him?" "Like what?" "Oh," Victor shrugged casually. "People hide things." Elias watched him carefully. "You knew Caleb owed money." "A little." "How much?" Victor smiled. "Enough that I'd notice if he suddenly became rich." There it was. Not grief, not sympathy. Curiosity. Dangerous curiosity. If you happen across any property belonging to him, Victor continued, I'm sure the county would appreciate knowing. The county? Victor chuckled. Let's just say some debts don't disappear because a man dies. Elias stepped closer. You know what I think? Victor's smile faded. I think you're more interested in what Caleb might have left behind than how he died. Victor said nothing. After a long moment, he simply climbed into his pickup and drove away. Elias watched the truck disappear down the highway. His instincts screamed louder than ever. Back at his cabin, Elias carefully unpacked everything from the cedar chest. The property deeds dated back nearly 70 years. Old tax records, family certificates, letters tied neatly with faded ribbon. Nothing suggested stolen wealth. Everything pointed toward inheritance. He finally opened the leather journal. The first pages contained simple entries about weather, hunting seasons, and timber work. Then, one sentence caught his eye. If my grandson ever reads this, he must never trust men who value land more than family. Elias frowned. There was no signature, but he was certain the journal belonged to Caleb's grandfather. As he continued reading, another realization settled over him. The fortune inside the chest had never been meant to make anyone wealthy. It had been preserved for one purpose alone, to protect the Dawson family when every other hope was gone. Caleb hadn't been searching for treasure. He had been trying to fulfill a promise. Elias leaned back in his chair. For 4 years after Rebecca's death, he had convinced himself that people were mostly selfish. Grief had narrowed his view of the world until kindness seemed rare. Now he wondered if the opposite had always been true. Perhaps good people simply left quieter footprints. Night settled over the mountains. Elias locked the journal inside his desk and placed the unopened letter addressed to Martha beside it. He would deliver everything tomorrow. No more delays. Outside, headlights briefly swept across his cabin window. A vehicle slowed, stopped, then continued down the gravel road without turning into his driveway. Elias waited several minutes before stepping onto the porch. Fresh tire tracks cut through the wet mud. Someone had come looking, and whoever it was had been careful not to leave their name behind. A pale spring sun broke through the clouds, casting long beams of light across the Bitterroot Valley, as if winter had finally decided to surrender. Elias Turner left home earlier than usual. The cedar chest rested securely in the back of his truck, wrapped beneath a heavy canvas. Beside him on the passenger seat lay the envelope addressed in faded blue ink, for Martha Dawson only. He had resisted every temptation to open it. Some truths belonged to the people for whom they had been written. As he drove toward the Dawson farmhouse, he found himself thinking about Rebecca again. She had always believed that honesty was an act of courage, even when it caused pain. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, she often said, is simply return what belongs to someone else. Those words echoed in his mind as he turned onto the gravel driveway. The farmhouse looked smaller than he remembered. Paint peeled from the porch railing. Several shingles had slipped from the roof, and the old barn leaned slightly after years of harsh winters. A rusted pickup sat beside a stack of firewood that had clearly been split by someone much younger than the woman who lived there. Martha Dawson opened the front door before Elias reached the porch. She looked older than 67. Grief had a way of adding years that birthdays never could. "I heard they found him," she said quietly. Elias removed his hat. "I'm sorry, Martha." She nodded without speaking and invited him inside. The house carried the familiar scent of coffee and cedar. Family photographs covered nearly every wall. One picture immediately caught Elias's attention. It showed Caleb as a teenager, smiling beside his father, while proudly holding the first deer he had ever hunted. He looked nothing like the man people had described over the past few months. He looked hopeful. Martha noticed where Elias was looking. "That was before," she whispered. She never finished the sentence. Before the deaths, before the gossip, before the town decided Caleb's mistakes defined his entire life. Elias gently placed the envelope on the kitchen table. "I found this." Her hands trembled before they even touched it. She stared at the handwriting for several long seconds. "I know this writing." A tear rolled down her cheek. "It's Harold's, Caleb's father. He wrote everything by hand." Slowly, almost fearfully, Martha broke the old seal. The room became completely silent except for the ticking of an old clock hanging above the stove. She began to read. After only a few lines, her breathing changed. Then came the tears. Not quiet tears, the kind that come from years of carrying the wrong burden. Elias looked away, giving her the privacy Rebecca would have wanted him to offer. Several minutes passed before Martha finally spoke. "He knew." "Knew what?" Elias asked softly. "Harold knew this day might come." She handed Elias the letter. "This isn't only for me anymore." After a moment's hesitation, Elias accepted it. The letter was dated nearly 25 years earlier. "My dearest Martha, if you are reading this, then our grandson has found the cabin. Everything inside belongs to him, not because it is valuable, but because our family survived by protecting one another, not by chasing wealth. These coins, the deeds, and every piece of land were saved for only one purpose. When someone we love has nowhere left to turn. If Caleb ever reaches this place, tell him I never judged him for falling. A good man is not measured by how many times he stumbles, but by how many people he helps stand again. Never let strangers decide who he was. Love always, Harold." Elias folded the letter carefully. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Martha whispered, "He wasn't running away." "No. He was trying to get there." "Yes." She covered her face with both hands. "I told him he should stop carrying everyone's burdens." Another tear slipped through her fingers. "He kept saying everything would be all right." Elias nodded. "He believed it." Martha looked toward the window. "I thought he abandoned me." Her voice cracked. "I spent months angry at my own son." Elias leaned forward. "He never stopped trying to come home." Those simple words seemed to lift something invisible from her shoulders. For the first time since he'd arrived, she managed a small, broken smile. "What else did he leave?" Without speaking, Elias walked outside and returned carrying the cedar chest. He opened it slowly. Sunlight reflected from dozens of old gold coins. Beneath them lay property deeds, family records, and the leather journal. Martha gasped. "My father-in-law always said our family had lost everything during the hard years." "He hid it," Elias replied. "Not to keep it. To protect it." She carefully picked up one of the deeds. "This land," her voice trembled, "it was my husband's grandfather's." She looked up at Elias. "Caleb knew where this was. I believe he found Harold's journal. And he came to save me." The realization struck them both at the same moment. Martha had quietly been selling pieces of her property to pay mounting medical bills. Had Caleb reached the cabin before the storm? He would have saved her from losing everything. Tears returned, but they were different now. They carried sorrow. They also carried pride. As the afternoon wore on, the two of them sorted through every document together. Elias refused to touch a single coin. "This belongs to your family." "You found it." "I returned it." "There is a difference." Martha smiled again, this time with genuine warmth. You remind me of Harold." Elias laughed softly. "My wife would have said the same thing." The mention of Rebecca no longer hurt quite as sharply as it once had. Perhaps grief never disappeared. Perhaps it simply made room for new purpose. As Elias prepared to leave, Martha reached for his hand. "You've given me my son back." He shook his head gently. "No." He did that himself. Driving home beneath the fading evening sky, Elias finally felt at peace with the decision he had made. He had returned a family's legacy. What he didn't know was that Victor Hale had already learned someone had visited the Dawson farm, and before another sunrise, Victor would decide he wasn't leaving empty-handed. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh pine through Bitterroot Valley, and for the first time since winter had ended, the mountains felt alive instead of lonely. 3 days had passed since Elias Turner delivered the cedar chest to Martha Dawson. Life in the valley seemed to return to normal. But beneath the quiet routine, something had changed. People had begun asking questions, not about the treasure, about Caleb. The first surprise came when Sheriff Daniel Brooks knocked on Elias's cabin door early one morning. "I need to ask you something." Elias invited him inside. Brooks removed his hat. "I've been reviewing Caleb's case." "And?" "I found statements from people we never interviewed." He laid several folders across the table. A school principal, a church pastor, a volunteer fire captain. Each report described the same man. Caleb Dawson had quietly repaired buildings after storms. He had donated anonymous payments to struggling families. He had driven elderly neighbors to medical appointments. He had even purchased winter coats for children whose parents couldn't afford them. Yet none of those people had spoken publicly after he disappeared. They assumed someone else already knew, Brooks admitted. Elias slowly shook his head. Good deeds don't make much noise. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Within a week, conversations inside Miller's diners sounded different. I remember Caleb fixing my fence. He helped my grandson after his truck broke down. He refused payment every time. The same people who had mocked him now spoke his name with regret. Elias never corrected them. Guilt was punishment enough. Victor Hale, however, refused to let the matter rest. Late one afternoon, he appeared outside Martha Dawson's farmhouse. I heard some interesting rumors. Martha met him on the porch. I've got nothing to discuss with you. Victor smiled politely. If Caleb left property behind, it belongs to my family. You don't even know what's legal. I know what's right. Victor's smile disappeared. You still owe money. Martha looked directly into his eyes. Not anymore. She closed the front door without another word. For the first time in years, Victor realized he no longer held power over the Dawson family. A month later, Martha made a decision that surprised the entire county. She sold only a small portion of the recovered gold, enough to pay every outstanding debt, enough to cover her medical treatments, nothing more. The remaining property deeds stayed exactly where Harold Dawson had intended them to remain, with the family. Then she did something Caleb would have loved. She established the Caleb Dawson Memorial Scholarship, offering annual financial assistance to students studying forestry, conservation, and emergency rescue. There are enough people chasing money, she told the local newspaper. I'd rather help someone who wants to protect others. On a warm Saturday afternoon, the town gathered outside the small community center. A simple wooden plaque stood beneath an American flag. No grand ceremony, no politicians, just neighbors. Sheriff Brooks stepped forward. I spent months believing rumors instead of facts. He looked toward Martha. I owe your son an apology. One by one, others followed. Some apologized aloud. Others simply placed wildflowers beneath Caleb's framed photograph. Elias remained near the back of the crowd. He preferred watching. Rebecca used to tell him that true healing rarely happened in dramatic moments. It happened quietly, one honest heart at a time. Several weeks later, Elias returned alone to the forgotten cabin. The brass key still fit perfectly. Inside, nothing had changed. Dust floated through the same narrow beams of sunlight. The photograph still rested above the fireplace. The silence remained peaceful. He opened Harold's journal one final time. Near the last page, he noticed a sentence he had somehow overlooked. "If this cabin is ever found again, let it remind whoever enters that wealth is safest in the hands of those who are willing to give it away." Elias smiled. Harold had understood something many people never learned in an entire lifetime. Treasure wasn't measured by what someone owned. It was measured by what remained after they were gone. He carefully closed the journal and placed it back inside the chest, where Martha had asked him to keep it until she decided what should become of the cabin. Before leaving, he looked around the small room once more. Some places deserved to remain untouched, not because they hid secrets, because they protected memories. Summer arrived early that year. Wildflowers covered the mountain meadows where snow had buried Caleb only months before. Hikers once again filled the trails. Children laughed beside the streams. Life moved forward, just as it always had. But every time Elias walked through those woods, he paused near the place where Caleb had fallen. He no longer saw tragedy. He saw courage. He saw a son who refused to stop crawling, even when hope seemed impossible. He saw a man whose greatest treasure had never been gold. It had been love for his family. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the Bitterroot Mountains, Elias stood overlooking the valley. He thought about Rebecca, about Caleb, about Martha, about all the people who had finally learned how dangerous it could be to judge a life before knowing the whole story. The mountains grew quiet. A cool breeze moved gently through the pines. Elias tipped his hat toward the fading light and whispered, almost as if speaking to heaven itself, "Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't found beneath the earth. They're hidden inside hearts that refuse to stop loving." Then he turned toward home. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt like he was walking alone. As our story comes to an end, I hope it leaves you with one simple truth. Sometimes the greatest treasures in life are not hidden beneath the earth, but within the human heart. Caleb Dawson was judged by rumors, misunderstood by his neighbors, and remembered only for his debts. Yet, in the end, the truth revealed a man whose greatest wealth was his love for his family and his willingness to sacrifice everything for someone else. It reminds us that only God sees the whole story of a person's life. We may see someone's mistakes, but God sees their struggles, their kindness, and every quiet act of love that no one else notices. Perhaps that's how miracles often happen. They don't always come as flashes of light or impossible events. Sometimes, God's miracles arrive through ordinary people who choose honesty over greed, compassion over judgment, and hope over despair. Sometimes, a miracle is simply the truth arriving at exactly the right moment to heal a broken heart. If you're going through difficult days right now, please don't lose hope. Keep believing that every season has its purpose. Just as winter eventually gives way to spring, the hardships in our lives do not last forever. Continue to be kind, continue to forgive, continue to help others even when no one is watching. The seeds of goodness you plant today may become tomorrow's miracle. As for me, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time with me. Although I am raising 2 children on my own, and life is often filled with challenges, I choose to face each new day with hope instead of fear. My children remind me that every struggle is worth enduring, and my faith reminds me that God never abandons those who keep moving forward. Creating these stories for you has become one of the greatest blessings in my life, and your kindness encourages me to keep sharing messages of hope, faith, forgiveness, and love. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to read your thoughts and hear your own stories. If you believe kindness still has the power to change the world, please share this video with someone who may need a little hope today. And if you haven't already, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your support truly helps me continue creating these stories and sharing them with people around the world. Before you go, may God bless you and your family with good health, peace, strength, and countless reasons to smile. May He guide your steps, comfort you in difficult times, open new doors of hope when you need them most, and fill your home with love that never fades. Thank you for watching. Until we meet again, take care of yourself, keep faith in God, and never stop believing that even the darkest winter can lead to the most beautiful spring.